With King Arthur finally coming out tomorrow, I wanted to make another video talking about more information on all the mechanics that he has, because his kit is quite interesting and unique, and he has a lot of unique interactions with items, with certain effects of other gods, etc. that I felt like we should really look into before this guard comes out. I already talked about a lot of his item interactions in a past video, which can be kind of seen as a part 1 to this one, so if you want to check that out, it's right here. And this one will again focus on other item interactions as well as other mechanics that are not tied to items. There's no particular order here, I'm just going through everything that I found interesting. And with that, let's jump right into it. Let us start with his dashes and cripple effects. Now, cripples are generally a very strong counter to any kind of dash, any kind of mobility, because they deactivate the possibility to use them. For King Arthur, this is also the case. With his 3, it's rather straightforward. You can simply not use the 3 in any of its versions while under the effect of a cripple, meaning neither the standard nor the combo one. With his 2, things are a bit more weird. While the icon shows up as not crossed out while under the effect of a cripple, meaning that you should technically be able to use it, you can't actually use it. So the dash version of the 2 is also stopped from being used by cripples. The reason why it's not crossed out is probably because you can still use the standard stance version, meaning that you can use kind of one part of the ability and that part is not a dash. All 3 of these dashes will also get interrupted if you dash into a cripple area. So they will just stop in their animation at that point, even if they dealt damage before or were animated to a certain point beforehand. What does still happen though is the stance swap. The stance swap with King Arthur is immediate when you use an ability, so it's not like you have to wait till the end of the ability. As such, if you dash into a cripple area while in your standard stance and you get interrupted by the cripple, then you will still end up in your combo stance. But that's not all of King Arthur's abilities. He also has his ultimate, which technically is a short leap in either variation, a little bit longer in the second one. And both of these ultimates are not prevented at all by cripples. So you can still use them. I suppose they have some sort of CC immunity built into some degree, at least the second version does, the first version doesn't really, but we'll get into that. Or it's more about the fact that they aren't considered dashes because they have different parts to them. And another thing that is not considered a dash for the purpose of cripples are basic attack leaps that he has. So if you're in a cripple field, you can still use your basics to move forward a little bit quicker in one direction and juke that way, which again also works very well with Heavenly Agility Tier 2, which I already addressed in the first mechanics video, so if you want to learn more about that, check that out because I don't want to explain it all again. But now we're moving on to his ultimate and CC immunity, because this is a very weird story to say the least. The problem that we had was trying to test it on PTS was rather hard, as PTS is only NA now and it's kind of laggy anyways, and if you go to jungle practice with 2 players you have ping. And this made it really weird, especially with Daji, because sometimes the animations seem kind of off or the ult would just come off very delayed. What we could tell was that it generally seemed like the ult in its fully charged form with the maximum combo possible would have CC immunity, at least at certain times, whereas the less charged version, that's just a stun, would not have CC immunity. We then switched over to Ares to kind of verify that, and that was kind of the same result for the most part, until this weird thing happened. So apparently there is a time frame in the ultimate where you're not CC immune, and I think it works similar to Naja. Basically, you will be CC immune during your dash, but then there's a point where you connect with the enemy at which you're not CC immune, and then there's a point afterwards when you're in the air where you're CC immune again. And that's obviously kind of weird, because if it doesn't work as intended, you're just kind of swinging at the air for some reason. What kind of verified that as well was when I tried to dash away from just the pull on its own, I was actually able to do so with the charge up version of the ult, so there is definitely some CC immunity in the dash when you have a full combo. You also start glowing yellow, so that's the indication for CC immunity. However, if you are already in the air with a target and the Ares pull happens, you take the damage, but it says immune for the pull, so you're technically still CC immune. The reason why I think it is that way is probably because the ult somewhat counts as a banish and not really a knockup, for example. We tested exactly that with Ares knockup immunity. His 2 will not knock up Ares when he's using his flames, as he is immune to knockups, but he will still get knocked up, or banished rather, by the ultimate, so it doesn't count as a knockup in that sense, which most likely also means that you can't pull anyone from the ult as a Willish, though I haven't verified that. Another very interesting thing for me was if the movement speed that you build affects your dashes or your forward leap from the basic attacks at all. In order to figure that out, I built only boots once, and then I built full movement speed the other time, and I just used the longest dash combo possible for movement to try all the different dashes and saw how far I could get with that and if there was any difference at all between having more movement speed or not having it. There is no difference, so there is no benefit in building more movement speed when it comes to the chaining of his movement abilities or the distance covered by his movement abilities. Can still be beneficial in other regards, but not for that. In order to further verify this for the basic attacks with their lunge attack, I also did the same thing with full movement speed and with no movement speed at all on the rings close to Odin that give you an exact indication of the distance you have covered, and it is always the same distance. It is roughly 18-ish units, a little bit less than 20 at least, and it will not change no matter what you build. I also did some further verification with these same distance lines for this 3 specifically because I wanted to be 100% sure, and there is also no difference here. And while we're already on the topic of ranges, let's talk about the range of his basic attacks, because it is absolutely ridiculous. I can't 100% pinpoint how long exactly it is, but it seems to be somewhere close to 30 units. That is including both the extended basic attack itself, which is 16 units, plus the lunge forward units that you get on top of that. So yeah, this guy shares the longest basic attack range in the game with some other characters by default, like for example a Willish, but on top of that also gets a lunge that is approximately 14-ish units. What should be mentioned in the context of his dashes is that against a moving target, they aren't necessarily the easiest ones to hit, because 2 of them are rather short range and the one with the longer range isn't that fast. So if a target is actively walking away from you, you will not immediately catch up to them, and sometimes you may have to use 2 dashes to do so. Also, do not underestimate the range of the 1. It is actually longer than you would think. You do have this targeter that shows you the range when you use it, but due to the fact that you're stepping forward while doing the ability animation, the distance that you're covering and the range that you're having that way is actually longer. By the way, you can also start using a basic attack and then cancel it into a 1 to get even more range, a very tiny bit, but it leaps you a little bit forward. Coming back to the range of the 3 here, this is actually rather interesting, because the 3 has to be hit on a target to connect, and the cone towards the end looks a little bit rounded off, so you have to make sure that it actually connects properly in order to get the protection shred. And that is not super easy. In order to get a better feel for that, it's good to know the range. So the ability range itself, to actually hit the ability on a target, is roughly 38 units. That is how far they can be away from you while standing. However, you can add a basic attack swing beforehand. If you do that, again, you cover a little bit more distance with that extra leap, and it will allow you to be roughly 48 units away, which is a lot easier to confirm. The 3 in standard stance also has 2 separate swings, one earlier in the animation and one towards the end. And I initially thought that you're not able to hit 2 on a target. Actually, you can though. The way you do that is by having a target run away from you. So this is more effective as a last ability when chasing someone, though I think it's still a bit conditional and doesn't always happen just because they're running away, because it depends on the movement speed and all that stuff as well. I'm actually not sure what that means for the protection shred, if you can stack that twice as well, but I would think not. I would think it's just a singular debuff that you can get once. Next up, we have RuneForged Hammer. Now, as you probably know, RuneForged Hammer only increases your damage by 15% while the enemy is affected by crowd control, not including knockbacks, blinds, and grabs. And I wanted to see what exactly that means for King Arthur's ultimate with its kind of unique mechanic. To compare it, I used Hydra's Lament as an item with equal power. Now, in RuneForged Hammer's case, the ultimate does 32 damage and 36 damage to Odinbot while in the air, one being the percentage damage, the other one being the normal damage. With Hydra's Lament, the damage is only 28 and 31, so while in air, the damage with RuneForged is increased. However, the landing drop is happening when the enemy is already on the ground and they're not under the effect of CC, therefore the damage does not change if you have RuneForged equipped or not. As such, the damage increase is relatively minor, but keep in mind that he also has a slow on top of that, so it's maybe not the best item, but also not the absolutely worst. I already talked about Hydra's Lament in the last video. I just quickly wanted to show why it kind of sucks even though it works pretty well. What you can see here is me using the combo with King Arthur and chaining a basic attack every single time in between. And what you will notice compared to anywhere else in the video, the combo is super slow. The basic attacks between the abilities take quite a while to come off, and while it's possible, especially with the leaps in between, it will slow down your overall damage output. Also, on the topic of basic attacks, I tested around a little bit with his movement mechanic, and honestly, it's a bit unfortunate in my opinion. You can actively prevent Arthur from dashing forward by pressing backward when using a basic attack, but you cannot force a dash. The dash will happen when the enemy is too far away when you click the basic attack button, and in that case you will dash forward towards him. What can happen though is that you're really close to the enemy when you're using your basic attack, but they start moving away during your basic attack animation, in which case they might be able to walk out of range while you are trying to actually hit them with the basic, and then you would have been better off if you were using the leap, but you can't force that. I would rather have it so that when you press forward you automatically use the leap version, but that's just my preference. Another thing that I wanted to test very similar to RuneForged Hammer was Void Shield with the ultimate, because if it is a true banish, then Void Shield should not have any extra effect. And that is in fact the case. I compared it with Rage for the same power and no other benefits, and while in the air, both did 31 and 28 damage per hit per tick, meaning that the target is in fact banished and not affected by Void Shield, similar to, for example, Naja ult. When dropping on the ground, however, Rage and Void Shield both did 268 damage, which was the true damage from King Arthur's ultimate, but the additional damage from the power scaling basically went up from 234 to 264. Meaning that the moment the target hits the ground again, they're already outside of the banish. So if you want to amplify both a little bit, you could technically build a Void Shield and RuneForged. Now, a brief introduction to King Arthur's combos, though I think we will talk a lot about that at a later point. I know this 3 has Protection Shred, and I think a lot of people will think that's why you have to start with a standard stand 3 most of the time. Hear me out here. I do not think that against most targets, with the exception of very tanky ones, 7 Protection Shred is really worth delaying the rest of your abilities all too often, especially because the duration of that shred is actually just roughly 2 seconds, so it won't last for your whole combo anyways. And there's another benefit at using the 3 towards the end, which I said before, is if you're chasing someone and they run away, it's much easier to hit 2 ticks off the standard stance 3 while they're running away from you. This is because the first instance is basically during the dash animation and the second instance is right at the end. So therefore, I think there's another combo that quite often will be the preferred choice. You can chuck in some basic attacks if the enemy is not getting away quickly enough here, but generally the combo that I would prefer, even though Hyra said there aren't any combos, is the combo stance to the knockup into the standard stance 1, into the combo stance 1, into the standard stance 2, into the combo stance 3, and then if the enemy is still alive, into the standard stance 3. And obviously, you can always chuck in an ultimate when you want. What this will allow you to do is close the distance to your enemy, put them in CC in the knockup immediately, then hit them with the only ability that really needs CC setup to be confirmed, being the standard stance 1, then hit them with the rest of the kit that can be used quickly, being the combo stance 1 and the standard stance 2, and therefore also setting up the slow that will allow you to confirm more hits of your 3 in combo stance, which does a ton of damage. He is obviously flexible in the use of his abilities, especially if you need an interrupt or something, you may want to switch things around, but overall I think this combo is one that allows you to confirm 3 to 4 abilities quite easily, that is easily to memorize that way, basically get you some muscle memory for one combo that you can reliably use for a lot of damage, and it also leaves your escapes open to some degree at least, so you're not completely caught out the moment you start using this combo. And just to quickly show you the duration of the protection shred of the ultimate, you can see me using the ult with a shred beforehand and without it, and you can see that by the time the Odin hits the ground, the damage is already the same again, so it really doesn't last all too long, and again, I think it's mostly important against very tanky targets. If you think you won't need additional dashes at the end of your chain though, then I would use the 3 in the standard stance first, going into the 2 of the combo stance and then the 1 of the standard stance and so on. So basically the same combo as before, but use the 3 in the standard stance first to get the protection shred set up and use as much of it as possible, because then it will be applied for quite a few abilities. I also know that a lot of people will try and start off with the combo stance 3 whenever they can, because it's such easy confirmable damage. But I wanted to show you why I think that is not the ideal path to go. So I compared just using all variations of the 2 and the 1 over using the 3 in both variations first. And what you can see here, even though the results are slightly skewed due to the Rahil, is that with the 2-1 combos, even though it's not properly chained here, you will do a fair bit more damage in a short amount of time while also having the enemy locked down in place. Again, that doesn't mean that you should always do it, but quite often it should be the better choice. Obviously there are more combo options, but we'll look into that in later videos when we can actually play him without the lag as well, to see how well attack cancelling works in his chain. On top of that, I also wanted to give you some gimmicky info that didn't really fit anywhere else. Soul Eater works on him as intended, so that's a very nice benefit if you're looking for a build like that. I couldn't only test it in 1v1s and it's not quite the same result there, so I have to see how good it really is on him. He seems to have a somewhat weaker early game against some matchups. Again, something I couldn't test not too in depth, but it's worth being aware of that the first 3 levels won't be your best friend. Winged Blade does not work properly on him at the moment. If you use the standard stance 3 dash, then it will activate Winged Blade for some reason. And yeah, that might be fixed on live client, but it might still be an issue. If you have a maximum combo meter available, then consider starting your combo with your ultimate right away, because there's a good chance that you will be able to use the other ult later in the combo if you're able to successfully lock the enemy down for a little bit, because you build combo meter relatively quickly. He does have all his abilities of an instant cast, but don't be afraid of that. It doesn't actually feel like instant cast if you're not used to it. It's more like a quick cast because it shows you where the ability will land anyways. RANGDA'S mask is an interesting item choice for him. It definitely works for him, and it's worth considering if this is something you want to include in your build for having much higher damage. It does go a little bit against his style of being apparently more bruiser and staying in fights longer, but from what I can tell so far, you can do most of his combo very quickly anyways, and he will just deal very high amounts of damage that way. There are a few things that I wanted to test but didn't get around to because PTS was not up anymore. That is, if you can stack Stonecutting Sword. I assume not, based on the other interactions. I wouldn't recommend building it anyways, but I don't know for sure. Also, if he actually gets the passive of Hunter's Blessing at full stacks. Again, not sure, probably wouldn't build it anyways. And also, if he is knock-up immune in certain of his dashes. I would think there's a chance that might be the case, but I don't know for sure. If you made it this far into the video, you may be interested in more information about King Arthur. I made one video where I did a whole damage comparison for him in terms of how he performs, especially against Tyr, but also in general, and it's a lot of damage. And I also made the other video that I talked about earlier with a lot more item interactions, so feel free to check those out. They will be linked above or at the end screen. That's it for today. I hope this was interesting and insightful. If you're new to the channel, feel free to smash the subscribe button. And also a quick shout out to my current members, being Kenny Olsen, R. Rawas, The Potatoes Etchy, Richard Thompson, Jado85, Cerebus, and Fro Double G Gaming. See you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth out.